I've travelled to Egypt for a very special anniversary. In this film, I'm walking in the footsteps of the most famous archaeological discovery of all time, made exactly 100 years ago in November 1922, the sealed tomb of Tutankhamun. I'm venturing into the Valley of the Kings and deep into Tutankhamun's final resting place. No one had ever found anything like this in the Valley of Kings, or frankly anywhere else. And I go to Oxford for a very special exploration of the incredible archives that meticulously record Howard Carter's exploration. That's almost ghostly, isn't it?
This is a glass plate negative.
This is incredible. And reveal the surprising appearance of the discoveries of a century ago. And you've got Carter's notes for that moment.
Yes.
Heavy wooden coffin, completely covered in gold foil. Journey with me as I come face to face with Tutankhamun. To understand Tutankhamun's tomb, you need to appreciate the place where he's buried, a deep gorge in the desert, guarded by mountains. Its official name in ancient Egypt was the great and majestic necropolis of the millions of years of the pharaoh life, strength, health in the west of Thebes. You and I know it as the Valley of the Kings. To get the bigger picture, I'm climbing up above the valley before the full force of the searing Egyptian heat sets in. This is one of the best viewpoints in the world and tells you everything you need to know about why the Valley of the Kings is there. There it is, that rocky gorge down there filled with pharaohs buried 3,500 years ago. They're here because they're out in the middle of the desert, their tombs can be protected, and they're also in the shadow of that wonderful pyramid-like peak up there that reminds them of the pyramids of their ancient forebears. And down here, you've got this green ribbon running through the Sahara, the Nile Valley. There it is, the Nile over there. On the far side, the ancient city of Thebes, the capital of Egypt. Modern-day Luxor on top of it with its remarkable ancient Egyptian temples. And here, on the very edge of the desert, you've got powerful pharaohs like Hatshepsut and Ramesses building their mighty temples on the edge of the desert. That is the land of the living. This is the land of the dead. My exploration of the search for Tutankhamun's tomb begins just outside the Valley of the Kings. Tucked on the opposite side of its protective mountains is the beautiful temple built by the great female pharaoh Hatshepsut, who ruled over 100 years before Tutankhamun. It was at this temple in the 1890s that a young artist came to work, recording some of the magnificent paintings. His name was Howard Carter. This is extraordinary. It's got to be one of the most dramatic archaeological sites on planet Earth. You've got this huge limestone bowl here on the west bank of the Nile, and at its heart, this gigantic temple built by a mighty pharaoh. It must have been thrilling for a young artist to work in this spectacular setting. Taking me to the very spot where Howard Carter worked is Dr. Baha Gaber.
He came here to Luxor and he copied most of the inscription on the temple. And come on, we'll let you see one of his beautiful painting that he did on that time of the Queen Ahmose. She was the mother of the Queen Hatshepsut.
That is so amazing. So that's 1896.
Exactly.
And look, you can see the same bits of damage here and on the shoulder.
And look at the gaps here. Oh, even the colors, still the same colors. More than 100 years.
It's spooky to think of him well over 100 years ago in this exact spot making this.
Yes, and he loved Egypt. He came in his 17 years old and he stayed for 40 years.
And so I guess through being an artist and then he became an inspector, so he's slowly just teaching himself the business of archaeology and Egyptology.
I think he actually loved to be in an archaeological site, to dig by himself, to discover the tombs and the temples here. When you start your work, enjoying all these beautiful paintings around you, on the end, you will be a great Egyptologist.
After years of painstaking, obsessive work, including many setbacks, Carter eventually managed to get permission to dig in the Valley of the Kings through his great sponsor, Lord Carnarvon. Carter built a house as close to the valley as he could manage. As part of the centenary celebrations, it's being carefully conserved. I'm meeting architectural historian Dr. Nicholas Warner, who's in charge of the project. So we're at Carter's house. So what does it say that he decided to put his house right on the edge of the desert?
The real reason for planting his house in the middle of the desert here was the proximity to the Valley of the Kings. So this is the closest point to the entrance to the Wadi, the actual valley itself of the Kings. So that's why he chose this spot. I mean, it was completely in the desert. I mean, really in the desert. Not a blade of grass in sight. And the place was actually called the Place of the Flies. So you can imagine that it must have been quite difficult from that point of view as well.
I guess it's far more efficient in terms of his time. He's right next to dig sites.
Absolutely.
He doesn't have to commute back and forwards across the Nile. It feels like quite a statement, though, coming to live right here in the desert as close as he can to his work.
I mean, he was absolutely committed to his work. And remember that when they built this house in 1910, they had years of not finding anything ahead of them. So, 12 years of not finding anything requires absolute commitment, not only on the part of, Carter, but also on the part of Carnarvon, who was funding, what seemed to be an impossible quest. 1922 was considered to be the last season that they were actually going to do any work to continue this quest.
The conservation work is helping to reveal how Carter's purpose-built house reflected his personality.
So here we go into the study, which is the biggest room of the house.
Very high ceilings.
Yes, very high ceilings for environmental reasons, so you actually keep the hot air at the top of the room and ventilate it.
And very brown.
Very dark, very brown. And we've returned the house in this room to the state that it was in. It was plastered with mud. That's it. Minimal furniture, all focused on work tables, that kind of thing. So
Bit of a bachelor pad.
yes.
Pretty Spartan, but no distractions.
No, very few. I think there's a postcard from him when the house was built to his niece. And on the back of the card it says, "My desert home, no buses or trams pass here." So it would be very, very quiet, possibly with the howling of the jackals at night to keep you company.
I don't want to be over dramatic here, but this is the room where he did his thinking, he did his preparation, he came up with his plans to excavate in the valley.
In a systematic way, yes. So obviously he had a vast experience of the valley going back, to 1900. So many, many years of work in which he tried systematically to excavate all of the hitherto unexcavated areas of the valley.
Imagine all those years of basically not finding what he was looking for. And he must have...
Extraordinary commitment. I mean, I would have given up myself, I think, years earlier. Such was the drive and the financing, don't forget that. I mean, it's not possible to do these things for nothing. So the fact that Lord Carnarvon was a consistent and generous sponsor is an important part of the success story.
Out of that window, you can see the road to the valley. I mean, you couldn't be any closer.
Yes, Yes, it's still, you know, half an hour donkey ride, so it's not that close, but it's certainly closer than anybody else.
And you've been in Egypt for a long time. He was pretty tough. He was used to this climate and this living.
Yes, compounded by the fact that he wore a tweed jacket and flannel belt most of the time, which is something that I personally can't comprehend at all.
Madness.
So, and you see these photographs of when he was removing objects from the tomb, you know, where he's got his braces on and his thick shirt and his tweed jacket to one side.
What I'm taking away from that building is just how single-minded Carter was. He's living a bit like a hermit on the edge of the desert, everything around him so functional, all giving himself the best chance of realizing his ambition and finding that tomb. He was completely convinced, but he must have been very convincing as well, because he managed to get Carnarvon to back him, to find not just any old tomb out there, but one particular one, a needle in a haystack. Previous work by other archaeologists in the valley had suggested that there could be a missing tomb belonging to an obscure New Kingdom pharaoh who died in 1323 BC. He was known as Tutankhamun. The prospect of finding Tutankhamun's lost tomb certainly helped to inspire Howard Carter's main financial backer in Britain, Lord Carnarvon. This is Highclere Castle, Carnarvon's home in Hampshire. I'm meeting Fiona, Countess of Carnarvon, who looks after the family collection. He would have known this room like this, would he?
It wouldn't have changed enormously. I think more tables, more candlelight, but he'd have certainly enjoyed reading the books in the library. There's 6,500 rather amazing books.
So he was a photographer in his own right as well?
He was an outstanding photographer, so even if he hadn't perhaps discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun with Howard Carter, he would have gone down in some way in history as being an outstanding photographer.
Why Egypt? Why do you think it was there that really grabbed his heart and mind?
Do you know, I think all his family here were collectors, Dan. They all collected the best over time. And he was always looking for something which reflected the beauty of the world around, both in what he saw through the camera lens.
Howard Carter and him would have been in this room together, plotting the next year.
Yes, actually, probably in his study, which is now my very messy study.
How did he get on with Howard Carter? Because it feels like they're quite different, and yet they obviously had a very good relationship.
They did, and for Howard Carter, it was so exciting because he was so down on his luck. He ended up with no job, nowhere to live, and no future. So out of that very depressing situation and trying to scrape a living, he was introduced to this aristocratic Englishman with money. Lord Carnarvon decided to take him on. He paid him a salary. He built him a house. So that all happened, and he was suddenly thinking, you know, I've got a future and my achievements and my knowledge are valued.
Oh, so they shared a love of Egyptology, but they also zoned in on one particular pharaoh, didn't they?
They did. I think it came down to the fact that, to start with, Carnarvon and Carter were spectators watching the American Theodore Davis work in the Valley of the Kings, and he always seemed to be having these triumphant finds. One of them was apparently the tomb of Tutankhamun, and Gaston Maspero wrote a very good paper on it. And at the end, he said somewhat portentously that they thought they'd found the tomb of Tutankhamun. But something in the future might prove them wrong, was sort of one of Maspero's last lines in this book. And Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon both thought that actually they hadn't found the tomb of Tutankhamun. They'd found the cache, they found part of his embalming process, and this was not the tomb of a pharaoh. So it was missing. So that's why when they first got the valley, concession to the Valley of the Kings, and they knew that around the tomb of Ramses VI, there were workmen's huts, so no one had looked underneath.
You've been through the archives. I'm sure there's a few accounts in there. What do you think it cost him, all this?
His widow said that she thought he'd spent £45,000 in those terms excavating in Egypt in the lead-up to the discovery of Tutankhamun.
So that's several million.
I'd have thought it's about £20 million.
£20 million.
Something
today.
like that in today's world. I mean, it was a huge amount of money.
Finally, the fruits of all that dedication, effort and money started to pay off. To see the evidence for that, I've travelled to Oxford. This is where all Howard Carter's notes and photographs are stored. I've come to explore a very special exhibition at the Bodleian's Western Library, Excavating the Archives. It begins with a simple note written a century ago. This is one of the most famous diary extracts in history. It's from the 4th of November 1922, and you can see the few words have been scrawled across the page any old how, showing the excitement of the writer. That man was Howard Carter, and he writes simply, "First steps of tomb found." He was usually rather meticulous at making notes, so the fact that he's just scrawled that across the page, I think really gives you an insight into his state of mind, his excitement. For years, he'd dreamt of this moment. This could be the climax of his career. The next day, Carter made a more considered entry after he dug down further and discovered some absolutely vital clues. Discovered tomb under tomb of Ramesses VI. Investigated same and found seals intact. Seals intact. That phrase speaks volumes. This appeared to be an undisturbed Egyptian royal tomb. Throughout November, Carter's team cleared away the spoil, the rubble, and went ever deeper down into the earth until they came to a door which again had its seals intact, Tutankhamun's name on it. At that point they had to wait because the man paying for the whole thing, Lord Carnarvon, had to make his way out by boat from England. But he did finally arrive with his daughter, and on the 26th of November the big event took place, one of the most exciting days in the history of archaeology, and Carter has written an account of it here in his excavation journal. I like this in particular because it is written very, very soon after the events it's describing. So this is his first impression, a contemporary eye view, if you like, of what Carter was actually thinking. Carter writes the now famous sentences. They'd made a sort of crack in the door, and he held up a candle. Some rotten air escaped from the tomb, and he's peering through into the darkness. There was naturally a short suspense for those present who could not see, because only Carter was looking through the door. When Carnarvon said to me, "Can you see anything?" I replied to him, "Yes, it is wonderful." Carter was looking in here through the entrance. If he'd turned left, he'd have seen these chariot wheels that the pharaoh would have needed for his chariots, in which he'd like to be depicted on. Then you get foodstuffs and clothing, all the things a pharaoh would have needed to live a healthy, eternal life. I'm heading back into the Valley of the Kings, following the modern road rather than Carter's donkey track. Tutankhamun grew up in the turbulent time of Pharaoh Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti, who created a new capital away from Thebes in the Valley of the Kings, in Amarna. There's been much debate about Tutankhamun's life and death and the building of his tomb. What seems certain is that he wanted to be buried here in the Valley of the Kings, last resting place of his ancestors from Egypt's new kingdom. There's only one way into the tomb, following the same route that Carter took through the piles of rubble a century ago, down a steep shaft that leads to the outer chamber, where I'm meeting Egyptologist Alia Ismail. I think this is one of the most exciting places on earth. You've worked in here loads. Do you still get excited when you come down here?
I get excited every time I enter the tomb of Tutankhamun. This is something you never get bored of.
This room, there's none of the carvings or the painting that I've seen in other tombs. Why was it this plain?
We know from the nature of Tutankhamun's story that this was plain because this tomb was not finished. And the whole idea behind finished and not finished tombs is interesting because a tomb is actually never finished, but how elaborate it is because how long that pharaoh has survived and lived as pharaoh. The longer you live, the more impressive your tomb.
Because you just keep adding chambers.
Absolutely. Tutankhamun died at the age of 19, barely ever being able to rule. 19, very young.
So I guess you'd expect to have a lot longer and be able to build a much more luxurious tomb.
Yes, if you lived longer, you had a greater tomb. When you're born, your tomb is starting to be prepared for you. So they knew that they were preparing for the afterlife. And so, depending on how long he would be alive, is how elaborate his tomb is. He died all of a sudden, and they pretty much had to finish it up quickly.
So that's why there's no painting on these walls. But the room was full.
The room was full of things, treasures, things that Carter actually describes as wonderful things. And
Wonderful things,
here,
yes. This is the room we're in right now. Isn't that amazing?
yes. And this is how he saw it. And everything is thrown and cluttered and messy. So coming in here, you would think, I mean, did people just stash things? Did they not think about putting it in order? Carter was very happy that he found all this treasure. But at the moment when he saw it, he was frightened that this would be a cache and not actually a tomb, because he wanted to find the tomb. He didn't want a cache.
So what's a cachet?
A royal cache is a place where priests would hide and stack away all the mummies, statues, treasures, everything. And they would only do that when they were scared that these would be harmed, and they would do it as a form of a safety.
By the candlelight, it would have just been flickering. It would have been just magical. When did he start to realize that maybe he did have a tomb on his hands?
Well, when you look here, you would see these statues. And when he saw those statues flanking the either side of the wall, he thought, no, I mean, these statues and their placement, there might be something beyond that wall.
So there was another moment of discovery in this story.
Absolutely.
Between the guardian statues in the chamber, Carter broke down the wall. Beyond it lay what he'd been hoping for all his life, a sealed and untouched burial chamber. Initially, there were great, huge golden shrines, big golden boxes, one inside another, like Russian dolls. He removed those all carefully, and he came to this red granite sarcophagus. He knew it was Tutankhamun's because there's the cartouche, Tutankhamun's royal name, and there's his birth name, Tutankhamun there, guarded by the goddesses. This was hopefully going to be the only intact royal burial ever found in the Valley of the Kings. No one had ever found anything like this in the Valley of Kings, or frankly anywhere else. Unlike the bare, unpainted antechamber, the burial chamber's walls are covered in colour. This burial chamber has some of the art that we usually associate with the burial chamber of pharaohs. We see Tutankhamun depicted all over the place. This is in fact his eye, his prime minister, and the man who very suspiciously succeeded him in power, although he didn't last very long. He's got the cheetah skin wrapped around him. He is giving life, giving new life to Tutankhamun here as a mummy. We come through here, we get Tutankhamun with his snake crown, being greeted by the goddess of the West, the goddess of the dead, basically. And here we have Tutankhamun with his car, which is sort of spiritual body double, being greeted by Osiris, Lord of the Dead, into the afterlife. Back in Oxford at the Bodleians exhibition, the display shows how Carter's team continued to meticulously record what they found in the burial chamber. We also have an extraordinary range of photographs of the objects themselves and of the recovery taking place. They were taken by a photographer called Harry Burton, and here are prints themselves. You can see Anubis in the so-called treasury. Anubis is the jackal god. Look at that linen shawl was placed around him thousands of years ago. I love this one here, shows those two statues seemingly guarding the entrance to the burial chamber that lay beyond that wall. And you also get, well, posed, but you get some very interesting images of the team going about their work of excavation, breaking through a wall in this case, and lifting up one of the shrine lids there. What's striking is that none of the pictures are any of the Egyptian workers named and credited with their roles. And that's particularly odd in this portrait of this young man here. Such a beautiful picture. He's been made to pose with one of the pendants found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. And it was only in much later life that a local man called Hussein Abdel Rasoul emerged and said that he was the boy and had a role in the excavation. The exhibition is based on the remarkably detailed collection kept in Oxford's Griffith Institute, which has all Carter's materials from the dig: photographs, plans and notes. I'm having a special private view with curator Daniela Rosano. We're starting with something very precious, an original glass plate negative made in Tutankhamun's tomb by Harry Burton. That's almost ghostly, isn't it?
This is a glass plate negative, and this is how Harry Burton took most of his images. So he would use that camera, put in the glass plate, and then take the shot. And then he developed all of them in a nearby tomb. It is estimated that altogether he developed around 3,000 of these images in his little dark room in the tomb nearby. Here we see the bottom part of the outer coffin, and then the middle coffin still covered, partly covered with the shrouds. And this is the moment he's exposing the face of the king and just in the process of removing the linen.
So perhaps because of the nature of it being physical, like a piece of glass, it feels to me like this sits alongside the actual artifacts that came out of Tutankhamun's tomb in terms of their importance historically. This is incredible.
Yeah, they really try to capture, not only the artifacts themselves, of course, but also certain moments.
Burton and Carter knew that the pictures were a vital part of the archaeological record, as well as being a key research tool.
Harry actually produced 10 of these photo albums for Howard Carter, which he kind of worked with. And so on that page here,
that's incredible.
We see that fantastic image of what proved to be the outer coffin in the end, 1 out of 3, lying in the sarcophagus. The lid has been removed, finally really revealing what is inside there. And I really, really like this image where, Burton really tried to capture that moment, that intimate moment, to kind of evoke the stillness, the silence of the tomb. You have the light shining on the face of the king.
So you didn't know it at the time, but this is Tutankhamun's outer coffin.
Yes.
But what I love is the detail there, which I didn't know about. Is that a floral wreath around that?
It's a tiny little floral wreath, but we have a series of images that
thank
Burton
goodness.
took, because they were very thorough, both Carter and Harry Burton.
Look at that, look at the close-up. Love that.
So
that's around the serpent and basically the thing that denotes pharaonic power.
The vulture is the goddess of Upper Egypt. She's called Nekhbet, and then the cobra is Wajid, the goddess of Lower Egypt.
Upper and Lower Egypt combined.
Yeah, and then wrapped around it is the tiny wreath. It's actually only 9 centimeters in diameter. It's not very big.
And they turned to dust. They no longer exist.
Yeah, there are a few other floral garlands that were found that have survived, but this one unfortunately didn't.
We're so lucky, even though that hadn't survived, that they were able to take such extraordinary photographs.
Yes, they were absolutely meticulous in documenting everything as best as possible. And we don't only have the photographs, we also have a series of object cards that were made. And we even have that amazing sketch, so where Newberry, the botanist, tried to show how the individual leaves were bound together.
It's just a reminder of the exquisite attention detail that they put into everything.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it speaks volumes that altogether it took 10 years to record the tomb, which in theory only consisted of 4 rooms, but was packed with more than 5,000 objects. It was also a very, very good thing that Carter happened to be a trained artist, but also that he had Harry Burton as the photographer, who was arguably the finest archaeological photographer of his time.
The photographs also reveal incredible story, including some of the last-minute problems that were encountered in the tomb nearly 3,350 years ago when Tutankhamun was buried.
So one of the quite amazing things is you can see here, there's this kind of black edge, and that was actually where they had to chop off part of the feet.
Because it wasn't flush, it didn't close
Yeah,
properly.
they realized that the lid of the sarcophagus doesn't close, so they decided to chop off the upper part.
And when we say they, I keep thinking it's the 20th century Howard Carter. This is the ancient Egyptians. This is 3,000 years ago.
Exactly. We can still learn something about the funerary by looking at the archival records.
And you can imagine the panic. They've gone through all the ritual, the lid goes on, and it doesn't quite close properly.
Yes, but I mean, I'm wondering if these things happen quite often, to be honest. And we can see they try to make good of it by pouring a lot of dark resin over it, which then trickled down the gilded coffin.
Everything else is so perfect, and then you've got this curious, sort of very all too human mistake at the feet.
Yes, but this is where you get the touch of the real.
Oh, yeah.
That's the amazing thing, including also the floral wreath, which I don't know might have been put down by a priest, but maybe also by his wife. I don't know.
Whether it's the chipping away of that or the placing of the floral wreath, it's things that connect you with not just a period of history, but with a precise second over millennia.
Yeah.
But this was just the outer coffin. Carter knew there must be other, even more spectacular layers inside, each of which had to be carefully recorded before opening the next. It was painstaking work, with the constant risk of damaging these priceless objects.
We know that Burton spent about 4 days to take images of everything. And then it was the moment where they decided to lift the lid. It was the 13th of October in 1925 that the big day had come.
And you've got Carter's notes for that moment.
Yes, and
So
they're
cool.
quite extensive.
And I don't mind his handwriting, actually. I've seen worse. The tackle being in position. By midday, the lid was very slowly raised. The coffin, it came up fairly readily, without mishap, revealing a second anthropoid coffin covered with a thin gossamer linen sheet, darkened and decayed, upon which were lying over the breast of the coffin floral garlands and a separate wreath of flowers. I mean, if I could be anywhere in the last 150 years, I would have been in the tomb at this moment. It is unbearably exciting.
And you would have been very privileged. It was only a very small group of people allowed inside. I have to say, personally, I find this image quite spooking when the middle coffin is still covered. I mean, it's not the image that people have in mind when they think of the sarcophagi, of course. In the museum, you see them as individual star pieces now.
Carter, the experienced Egyptologist, was stunned by the ancient floral tributes. No one had seen anything like this before.
He does explicitly said, among all the splendor, there's nothing so beautiful like these few withered leaves of flowers, yeah.
I must have seen these pictures, I do get that impression. What must have been so enticing is that you can see through the shroud, and there are tears and gaps in the shroud there, and he says, underneath the linen sheet or shroud, in places a glimpse can be obtained of elaborate multicoloured glass inlay upon fine gold work, and that's what you can see there. So
Yeah.
even at this stage, the next stage beckons.
Yeah, again, you have the coffin in the shape of a human, but quite astonishing on that sarcophagus is that it has all these inlays.
So this is afterwards when it's been removed from the other coffin.
Yeah, so that's one of the so-called studio photographs that Burton took after conservation had taken place. This time, the face, the ears, the beard, the hands were actually made of gold.
What?
Yeah, and then the eyebrows, the eyelids are inlaid blue-colored glass again.
And so these are the hieroglyphs that you can see on the surface.
That's some of them. So, you see these two columns with inscriptions, but on the side there were inscriptions as well. And so Carter made that little sketch of the shape of the coffin with the numbers that you can understand where part of the inscriptions were placed, and then he copied them.
The hieroglyphs all simply repeat familiar prayers associated with death and the afterlife. I get very frustrated that the hieroglyphs never say anything interesting historically.
I mean, we do know the man for the inscriptions, Alan Gardiner, was a bit frustrated.
Oh, really?
That, what he hoped to find were boxes with papyri, of course,
Yes.
giving us some
Bit of
historical
biographical
information
detail, yeah.
about that, very dubious period, the Amarna period.
And are they getting more valuable as we go down through the layers?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
But at this point, one of the mysteries was solved because everyone was wondering why the three coffins are so extremely heavy. And then it turned out, because the inner one was made of pure gold, weighing more than 100 kilos.
In a coffin, let's go. So this is the last of 3 coffins, is it?
Yes, so that's the last
my
of
goodness.
3 coffins.
Wow.
And again, this is like, I think, one of the most spookiest images I can think of. So the last coffin proved to be made of pure gold. Again, you have these floral colors, shrouds.
And so we're all so used to seeing those images of the coffins. They're some of the most reproduced images on Earth, but we don't see the condition in which they were actually found by Carter. This is a completely different way of looking at it.
I mean, I think all of the 3 coffins, but in particular the inner one and also the mask, looks so different when you see these photographs that Burton took of the objects in situ with the linen shrouds and the floral colors. You see a lot of restoration work was still necessary, and I think, you know, that gives people a completely new idea. It shows people familiar things, but in very unfamiliar ways. So that's
Have we opened?
the mask.
Have we opened the last coffin?
That's it.
So this is the body of Tutankhamun with his death mask.
Yes, so that's the lid of the inner coffin taken off, and then finally we have a look at the king's mummified body,
Oh my goodness.
although not his face yet, because it's covered by this amazing mask. And it's so astonishing to look at these images, because I'm very sure most people, when they think of the mask, they have a picture in front of them where you see it like as this iconic object, a portrait bust, more or less. But actually, it was an integral part of the body. It was placed over the king's head, covering part of his upper chest and back. And again, you know, you have floral wreaths and colors, and it just gives you a completely different impression, doesn't it?
It really does. And to see one of the most famous pieces of art ever created in the condition it was in just at that moment of rediscovery is just something else. And so this is the mask all cleaned up.
All cleaned up, and then Burton, well, he decided to photograph it on a kind of stand, and he took off the beard that just, you see the face more clearly. And then he did what was kind of standard practice in these days with shiny objects. You put on a very, very thin layer of paraffin wax to stop it from reflection. And so in that way, you can see the really subtle modeling of the face. Carter, of course, produces a lot of record cards again, describing the mask, the pierced ears, again, the vulture and the cobra, the color, the materials, the inlaid eyes, the pupils made of obsidian, the eyebrows, everything.
So we've learned everything we can learn from the outer coffins, from the mask. It now goes inside.
Now we are finally going inside, and starting on the 11th of November 1925. So we're talking about, this is already the 4th season. And then finally the big day has come, and a committee is gathered.
Yeah, the great and the good have arrived.
Of course, including Carter. Pierre Lacour was the head of the Antiquity Service, other Egyptian authority members.
And what's so fascinating is looking at the surroundings. They're in one of the Valley of the King's tombs.
Yeah.
So far it's been conjectural, meaning no one's ever... What does a pharaoh look like in his sarcophagus? No one's ever known. Okay.
Exactly. No, what would he look like? What would be on his body? And then over the course of 9 days, they discover more than 150 objects on the body. And then Carter produced probably some of my favorite archaeological records ever.
Beautiful.
A series of 18 so-called autopsy drawings. What you see here are 2 of them. And so already all along, while they are unwrapping, he is meticulously describing everything in his journal already during that moment, giving numbers to the individual objects. No? So everything on the body has the number 2, 5, 6. And then, you know, he starts numbering them with A, B, C, D. Of course, he's quickly running out. He reaches that. So what you can see here, of course, we've already reached triple O and triple P
amazing.
Amulets. No? That vulture, and then here, the amazing scarab.
They are just beautiful drawings in their own right, let alone what they're actually portraying.
No, so with these drawings, he really tried to exactly capture the position of each object. So when another layer of bandages was removed and more objects were visible, he produced the next autopsy drawing. So it's basically now the images. We're going more or less through the body, so to speak. You see,
He was covered in jewellery.
he was.
Goodness me. And there's the famous sandals.
Yes, the sandals.
all of that adornment, and you finally see just the old bones. That's all we are.
Yeah.
At the end of it. But it's so striking just that we've come through so much splendor and so much adornment, so much religion and mythology, and yet at the end of the day, there's just a little blackened skeleton right at the heart.
Yes, and it is a little 19-year-old man.
Yeah.
No, I think it's important not to forget it. We're talking about someone who died prematurely and unexpectedly. So you have his body, and then you have the mask, but then you have the 3 coffins, the sarcophagus, the 4 shrines, the burial chamber, the whole tomb, and then of course the Valley of the Kings, and all of that protecting Tutankhamun.
To mark the centenary of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, Daniela has come up with a rather special project. She commissioned an Oxford florist, the garden, to recreate one of the smallest floral tributes discovered on the outer coffin, using the precise notes and photographs made by Carter's team. Florist Ellie Murphy has been working hard to recreate something that was originally made for Tutankhamun's tomb.
I like to do something a bit different, and I feel like this is like nobody ever gets asked to do this, so this is like a special thing. Like anybody will tell you, I like to do little fiddly things. This is basically right up my street. Kind of grabbed it with both hands when it came along. Even though times changed, we still use flowers to say different things, so I guess that hasn't changed.
Ellie is using the same types of flowers and arranging them exactly as recorded by Carter's team.
So we are using cornflowers, and these ones have been preserved, and they've actually kept their colour really nicely. And we're using olive leaves, alternately inside out and right side out, to give the green and grey as we go along. And we're using bindweed because we wanted to keep it as natural and as similar to the photo as possible. They've laid them out in the description, right way round and wrong way round, so that you get like a nice repetition of silver and green as you go along.
I'm joining Daniela and Professor Richard Parkinson to get a first glimpse of the recreation. Hi, Ellie.
See you again.
You've been making our amazing wreath.
Yes, let me get it for you. I think you're going to be pleased.
Were you pleased making it, or was it a labour of love?
No, it was a learning curve for sure, but we've got there.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's quite similar to the picture, I think.
It looks exact.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Nice deep blue of the cornflowers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the size and the proportions work
Yeah.
with the cornflowers, yeah.
The opposites of all that gold and that hard metal is completely the other end of the spectrum, isn't it?
And placed on the coffin, you just have that wall of plain gold, and then this texture, the colour, and the colour of that blue is incredible. I mean, that really would catch the eye and stand out in the funeral ceremony.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and even the little detail that, the leaves are alternating with the green side and the silver side.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing what you made out of the images and the object cards and the drawings we gave you. And it's so moving to see it in real life.
I'm very struck by how organic that feels next to the beautifully crafted gold. We think of the sophistication of the metallurgy and the material culture. This feels kind of childlike and from a different period.
And it's a wall of plain gold, and then you just have this brilliant blue and the green of the olive leaves, some shiny, some white, against it. I think it humanises it.
It changes it completely, doesn't
Somebody
it?
must have put that on the coffin after it was loaded to the sarcophagus, after it was all sealed up. So that's the final act before they close the great stone lid. It looks beautiful.
Do you think this is the first time anyone's attempted to recapture that?
I think
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure.
And Ellie, just to be clear, how much of this did you have to sort of make up, and how much could you actually reconstruct from the diagrams and the photographs?
So the diagrams made it really easy because there was like a cross section. It's fiddly, but it's really simple once you read the instructions. It had all the measurements and what goes where.
So those diagrams were pretty accurate.
Spot on, yeah.
And it's funny because so much has changed in the religious devotions since the ancient Egyptians, but some things have stayed the same. That you're still a florist, people still come in here and ask for garlands and wreaths.
Wreaths every single day. Yeah, every morning we will send out tributes.
And that's why we really wanted to use this for commemorating the anniversary, to remind people it's not just a golden adventure, it's about the death of a young man. He's the same age as the undergraduates at Oxford, so It's really trying to just bring back the humanity. It's such a pretty little wreath. It speaks volumes.
It was a pleasure to make it.
When you think about Tutankhamun, it's all too easy to think about him as the golden pharaoh. But what I've learned today is that actually his death and burial was about flowers as much as it was precious metals. It's striking to think that humble but so significant floral wreath would once have lain with the magnificent objects that can now be seen in Cairo, looking, as we're so used to seeing them now, conserved, cleaned up and on display. I'm taking a close look at these original treasures with Egyptian museum conservator Eid Murtar. So which of the coffins is this?
This one's the middle coffin, because before this one he discovered the wooden gilding coffin, which at the Grand Egyptian Museum at the moment. It's wood and the gold is fixed above it, and then they inlay with precious stones and blue glass.
Eid has been part of a team using modern techniques to find out how these objects were originally made.
When you look closely for the object, of course you have more information. And when you make examination or using non-destructive methods like microscopic picture or X-ray fluorescence techniques for analysis, you can discover a lot of things. Like, for example, the gold sheets they used to make this coffin, it's not only one gold sheet. There's different ones made from different alloys from gold. For example, we have gold with silver and with copper, but not the same amount, and that means it's different sheets.
100 years later, you're still learning things from this.
And I'm sure after 100 years more, the new generations will still discover new things. It's full of stories, full of mysteries, and we're still learning more about this object until the moment.
So here it is. I'm up close to the most famous archaeological treasure ever recovered, probably the most famous piece of art ever created. It's a golden death mask of Tutankhamun. It sat right next to his mummy, underground, inside those coffins and sarcophagus for 3,000 years. And yet here it is, almost like it's new. When I'm this close, I realize it's not only a thing of extraordinary beauty, but it is such a powerful representation of the young man himself. You feel like you're in his presence. It's breathtaking. And so this was the final layer before the mummy.
Yes, inside the golden coffin, it was the golden mask of Tutankhamun.
And you've studied this more than anyone in the world. What can you tell me about this?
We can say the golden mask, it's made from several pieces, not from only one sheet of gold. And then they join these pieces together, even with soldering, as you can see with the face, because the face it was as a one part, or even with the small screw to fix the two layers together. We have here different kind of layers. We have precious stones and we have blue glass on the beard, because the beard it's made from two layers. One like external tube, and it's inserted inside half a tube. It's made to be used as a tenon to hold the beard.
It looks very lifelike. This is how the pharaoh would have tried to present himself.
Yes, so they want to present themselves with the same shape of the mummy because they thought they will have a new life after that. So that's why they want the soul to identify his mummy or his body.
What is it like for you getting to work on this object every day? You're so lucky.
You know, it was my dream to be working in the Egyptian Museum when I was young. And because this object, and when I start my job here in 2011, I never thought I will be working with the golden mask of Tutankhamun. It was a wonderful feeling, and I think it's one of the main unique moments in my life.
It's been wonderful this year, exactly a century after the rediscovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, and nearly 3,350 years since he died, to reconnect with Tutankhamun and the incredible legacy that was left to us in the Valley of the Kings. A legacy reflected in the moments captured when the tomb was opened, revealing both its magnificent treasures, but also those intimate human objects, like the small wreath of flowers, all laid for the pharaoh, the young ruler who could have been lost forever. He didn't get to rest in an eternal afterlife in the Valley of the Kings, but he has left an inspiration for all generations, a different form of immortality. I don't think there's anyone alive today who loves archaeology and history that hasn't been in some way inspired, in some way had their lives changed by what happened here. The discovery of this tomb 100 years ago is surely the most striking, the most exciting moment in the history of archaeology. The idea that this boy pharaoh had lain for almost 3,500 years undisturbed in this sarcophagus, only to be discovered in 1922. It's something that no matter how many times you read about, you watch on TV, you listen to, when you come here, it's almost overwhelming.